directed by T.C. DeWitt. We are talking Demon Detective. Now let me ask you, are you a fan of Constantine or Hellblazer comic? Then you may want to check out this movie, because this is clearly inspired by the John Constantine story, but it's also a little bit influenced by Ghostbusters, one methinks. Okay, so what's the story? It follows Miles Mako, who is a kind of wizard, as he is described in this, a kind of magically powered individual who battles demons, ghosts, things like that. He's not sanctioned by the church necessarily. He has worked with the church, but it's kind of his own thing. And he has a kind of a sidekick who kind of helps him in the kind of the bureaucracy of it all. And he fights various sort of different demonic forces and the like. And he ends up kind of getting a couple of cases, one of which involves this woman who is seemingly being harassed by a potential demonic force that is familiar to Miles Mako and may have a connection to his past. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So yes, if you are hungering for more Keanu Reeves Constantine or the TV show Constantine and you can't get enough of that, then maybe check this one out. So it's clearly obviously a very sort of stylistic choice, not officially associated with Constantine or Hellblazer, but clearly influenced by it. But it's, as I say, also Ghostbusters. Specifically the Dana Barrett story, it was surprising that the scenes involving this woman are almost exactly how the scenes that involve Dana Barrett play out in the original Ghostbusters, to the point where it's like, is this a parody to a degree? Anyway, let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. Now, despite it being somewhat derivative of those two properties, I actually still found this movie quite entertaining. Just the general idea, I mean, Constantine was a cult favourite character for a reason. And, you know, he had a mainstream movie, a TV series, you know, comic books, all the rest of it, for a reason. And this movie is clearly sort of tapping into, I think, what made that character popular. You know, a kind of somewhat rebellious human sort of character who's a little bit anti-authority, trying to deal with demonic forces without kind of the typical kind of Catholic exorcism style route, more using kind of magic and having more of a kind of a back and forth of these kind of demons and things like that. It's all here. And, you know, it's on the lower budget side, admittedly, but I do think it's, you know, just as kind of entertaining as maybe its more well-known sort of inspiration, certainly. There's some kind of fun sort of sequences here involving a variety of different sort of demonic forces, and we have a few kind of demons with you know, various prosthetic makeup and stuff, which looks kind of quite fun, albeit in a sort of low budget way. And we get VFX while he's casting his spells and all that sort of thing. And I mean, it's called Demon Detective. There's not a whole lot of detecting going on, to be honest with you, but it's still sort of a, you know, he's sort of been on a few cases and stuff where he's trying to help a variety of different people. It's more about the kind of the rituals and all the rest of it. But it's still a kind of an entertaining sort of story, and it kind of leads to sort of a larger world outside of this. What I also think makes this movie quite fun, and maybe what the Constantine film and TV show didn't have, is that there was like a rival gang of kind of ghost paranormal investigators, YouTubers, who are also trying to be competitive in this seemingly somewhat crowded marketplace, and that added in a kind of a fun element to the story as well. It has a couple of recognisable faces in small roles. Adrian Barbeau, you've got Vivica A. Fox, Doug Jones, all show up in sort of small roles, but gives it some kind of genre cred, shall we say. The film is not really a horror comedy as such. It has a slightly lighter tone, but it takes the movie somewhat seriously, but has just about enough of a kind of a a lighter tone to make it, I think, get the tone just about right. So I do think it's tonally, it's probably quite sort of on the money. You know, and on a technical level, it's kind of relatively well shot and everything for the budget. I think it's all perfectly kind of serviceable in regard to those elements without ever really being like remarkable in any way. I think the characters are quite sort of fun. I do have a couple of issues. I think it was more of some choices in the performance necessarily, but generally speaking, I thought the characters at least were at least likable and sort of, you know, somewhat interesting. You kind of wanted to know kind of more about them to a degree. What doesn't work, and let me just stay with the characters. A character of Miles Mako, you know, again, very derivative of John Constantine, and I think his performances kind of vary really, this actor, and he's quite softly spoken in the kind of the quieter scenes, and it almost feels like it's a little bit too subdued in those sequences, and but when he's kind of casting and stuff, it almost seems a little bit too pantomime. So I had some issues with the kind of some acting choices here, but I still kind of like the character overall. My biggest issue with this movie is I think the pacing is just too slow. Now, it runs nearly 2 hours, and I think the movie has this sort of leisurely pace where I think it could have been quite a exciting movie, but instead there's sequences that are just played with very low energy, and I think could have been filmed or edited in a way that would make them a little bit more impactful, because it just feels a little bit lackadaisical in its pacing. But it's not a mega long film, but the story is not exactly complicated, and there's scenes here that just feel like they're sort of extended. And again, going back to the character of Miles Mako, there's this choices here, and perhaps it was the direction where he just seems to kind of like meander around and not really say anything. It just kind of like almost look like a deer in headlights at times. And I don't know if it was meant to be like I'm being introspective or something like that, but it just came across as like he's just sort of standing around, like not doing anything and kind of just not talking and just sort of, as I say, looking a bit sort of spaced out overall. So, you know, I thought the character of Miles was interesting, and I didn't necessarily think the acting was terrible, but it wasn't strong, and some of the choices were a little on the odd side. I think some of the smaller characters actually fare a little better here. I think this character would have benefited. Maybe it would be a bit too derivative of Constantine, but have a bit more gravitas, to be honest, rather than this kind of like airy-fairy vibe that I kind of got with it. The pacing being the main issue. Outside of that, the movie does suffer from having a little bit of the kind of the low budgets, and you know, some of the kind of the effects here look a little bit on the kind of the cheesy side. I do think some of our named actors could have had a little bit more of an interesting role. You know, like Vivica Ray Fox is like the kind of like the headmistress of a school. Doesn't really have anything to do, if I'm honest. Doug Jones, at least, is our kind of main villain. But he's only really in one scene, and you know, again, there's a little like, okay, Adrienne Barbeau and Vivica Ray Fox, I didn't really feel like contributed a hell of a lot to the actual sort of story. It seems like a little bit of a waste from clearly like one day of shooting and things like this. So I think the movie is an entertaining film overall. It's not going to kind of change anyone's mind who I think is not a fan of lower budget movies, but certainly if you don't mind, for example, the Constantine TV series, you know, it feels a lot like that in some degree, possibly even a little more low budget than that even, but it's on that vibe. So you may want to check it out. I overall, though, did find this movie somewhat of an entertaining movie. I was kind of interested, and I kind of like the world that they built around it, albeit it's kind of one you've seen before. So 6 out of 10 for me. What were your thoughts if you've seen it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.